If you grew up in the 70s, you know exactly what a Sunday afternoon sounded like. It was the screen door slamming, the hum of the window unit, the rattle of Pyrex dishes hitting the table, and, in many homes, that little Piggly Wiggly recipe booklet. So many of the scratch-made sides that defined our childhood have vanished into grocery store delis and frozen boxes. Today, we are bringing 25 of these forgotten 1970s Southern classics back to life, exactly the way they were meant to be tasted. Let's get started. 1. Southern Hush Puppies. First up is the undisputed king of the fish fry, classic Southern Hush Puppies. This 1970s recipe completely skips the fancy modern add-ins. Instead, it relies on standard yellow cornmeal, a pinch of granulated sugar, and a handful of finely grated sweet onion that wept just enough juice into the batter. Mama always mixed this up in a pastel-colored Pyrex bowl and let it rest on the counter for exactly 10 minutes. That let the cornmeal soften before it ever hit the hot lard. Watch how they drop from a battered tablespoon and fry up to that perfect, deep, golden brown. Today, most folks just tear open a frozen bag or get them through a drive-through window. They've been forgotten as a homemade art outside of small coastal fish camps and Sunday family fish fries. But one bite of these, crisp on the outside, pillowy soft inside, and I am instantly 8 years old again. Next up is the absolute cornerstone of every Southern church potluck, classic potato salad. This recipe takes me straight back to hot afternoon family reunions. The old booklet specifies using russet potatoes, hard-boiled eggs, and a very precise ratio of Duke's mayonnaise to bright yellow mustard. But here is the real old-school secret that people forget today. You have to pour a generous splash of sweet pickle juice straight from the jar over the potatoes while they are still steaming hot. That warm starch drinks up the tangy vinegar before you fold in the creamy dressing and a handful of crisp, finely diced celery. It keeps the salad from turning heavy or bland. It is rich, it is deeply comforting, and it tastes exactly like a paper plate loaded down at a family barbecue. Next is a true vintage staple that used to sit in a giant, heavy glass jar right on the countertop of every country store: pickled eggs. This recipe uses a beautiful, sharp vinegar brine infused with whole black peppercorns, yellow mustard seeds, and a dried bay leaf. But the real magic comes from adding a few slices of fresh garden beets right into the mason jar. That is what gives the egg whites that gorgeous, nostalgic magenta pink hue when you slice them open. Apart from deep pockets of the Mississippi Delta or rural Appalachian gas stations, you almost never see these made from scratch anymore. The Piggly Wiggly booklet notes they need to cure in the dark corners of the icebox for at least a week to get just right. They have a sharp, vinegary snap that cuts right through the richness of fried chicken or heavy barbecue. 4. Jiffy Corn Pudding. Number 4 is a church social favorite, Jiffy Corn Pudding. Back in the 70s, every Southern pantry had a stack of those little blue and white Jiffy boxes that cost less than a quarter. This Piggly Wiggly recipe upgrades that simple mix by folding in a can of Del Monte cream-style corn, melted butter, sour cream, and a couple of farm-fresh eggs. Mama always baked it in her Harvest Amber glass baking dish until the edges turned chewy and caramelized. Today, people usually serve regular canned corn out of convenience, and you really only find this scratch-made casserole at Deep South family reunions or rural funeral lines. When it bakes, the kitchen fills with a sweet, rich aroma that takes me right back to family dinners, where we crowded 20 people around a single dining table. 5. Cream cheese ball. Next up is the ultimate 70s party centerpiece, the classic cream cheese ball. Long before pre-made dip tubs took over the deli aisle, a hostess proved her worth by rolling one of these by hand. The recipe calls for 2 blocks of softened Philadelphia cream cheese, a dash of Worcestershire sauce, finely minced green bell pepper, and a small can of crushed pineapple, thoroughly drained through a cheesecloth. The secret is the outer coating. You roll the whole ball in chopped toasted Southern pecans until it's completely covered. Mama always served this on a smoky gray glass platter surrounded by a ring of crisp Nabisco Ritz crackers. It is thick, savory, and has that distinct nutty crunch that instantly brings back memories of noisy holiday open houses and record players spinning in the living room. 6. Ham salad. Number 6 is old-fashioned ham salad. This was the absolute best way to use up the leftover bone-and-cured ham after a holiday when a big ham was prepared. The 70s booklet instructs you to run the cold ham through a hand-cranked meat grinder right over the counter until it's finely minced but not mushy. Then you fold in heavy blue plate mayonnaise, a spoonful of bright green sweet pickle relish, and a pinch of celery seed. Aside from a few old-school independent butcher shops in country towns, most folks now just buy those plastic tubs of processed ham spread at the supermarket. But this homemade version is completely different. It's smoky, tangy, and when you scoop a heavy dollop of it onto 2 slices of sunbeam white bread, it tastes exactly like a summer picnic by the lake. 7. Bisquick sausage balls. Number 7 takes us straight to our childhood. Bisquick sausage balls. In the 1970s, that bright yellow box of General Mills Bisquick was a staple for every busy Southern mother. For this recipe, you get your hands right into the bowl to knead together raw, seasoned pork sausage, preferably Jimmy Dean regular or hot, with a big handful of sharp cheddar cheese shredded straight from the block, and just enough baking mix to hold it together. There is no water added. The moisture comes entirely from the fat of the meat and cheese. They bake up into savory, golden bites that leave a little grease on your fingers. Today, people often buy them pre-frozen, but making them from scratch gives you those crispy, cheese-laced bottoms that disappear off the platter before they even have a chance to cool down. 8. Homemade pimento cheese. Next is what we used to call the caviar of the South, homemade pimento cheese. Long before it became a gourmet grocery item, this was a staple made in every kitchen out of pure thrift. This recipe rejects the modern food processor. You use a box grater to shred a block of sharp cheddar and a block of mild Colby cheese, giving the spread its signature uneven texture. Then you mix in a small drained jar of diced pimentos and just enough Duke's mayonnaise to bind it together, adding a pinch of cayenne pepper for a tiny kick. Spread thick on fresh white bread with the crusts cut off. It is creamy, sharp, and tastes like a hot afternoon spent under an oak tree. 9. 3 bean salad. This is the ultimate make-ahead summer side. 3 bean salad. This was a staple at every 1970s backyard barbecue because it actually tastes better the longer it sits in the refrigerator. The booklet combines green beans, yellow wax beans, and dark red kidney beans, all pulled straight from those familiar green Del Monte cans. You toss them in a bright, sweet and sour marinade made from apple cider vinegar, a heavy hand of granulated sugar, salad oil, and thin rings of sweet Vidalia onion. Today, you really only find this made from scratch at family reunions in rural pockets of Georgia and Alabama, as most folks just buy the bland, pre-packaged deli tubs. When you bite into it, it's cold, sweet, and tangy, bringing back memories of heavy paper plates buckling under the weight of a summer feast. 10. Corned beef and cabbage. Number 10 is a comforting classic that used to simmer on stoves every single winter. Corned beef and cabbage. Back in the 70s, Mama would head down to Piggly Wiggly to pick up a cured brisket package complete with that little clear plastic spice packet full of whole mustard seeds and bay leaves. This recipe has you simmer the beef for hours before dropping in thick wedges of green cabbage, whole carrots, and small red potatoes during the last 30 minutes of cooking. The cabbage absorbs all that salty, spiced broth until it's completely tender. It fills the entire house with a rich, savory aroma that reminds me of coming inside after playing in the cold until my cheeks turned red. 11. Cornbread with cracklins. Next up is a true old-school masterpiece, corned bread with cracklins. This is a recipe born out of pure Southern resourcefulness that my grandparents lived by. You start with a heavy, well-seasoned Lodge cast iron skillet, heating up a spoonful of bacon grease until it's smoking hot. The batter uses pure, unsweetened white cornmeal mixed with a big handful of crunchy pork cracklins, those crispy pieces of fried pork rind that we used to buy in crinkly cellophane bags at the country store. Today, most modern families use sweet, box-mix cornbread, and you rarely see traditional cracklin bread outside of deep rural pockets of the Carolinas. When you pour the batter into that screaming hot skillet, it forms a dark, shattering crust on the bottom. It's dense, deeply savory, and tastes exactly like a winter night by a wood-burning stove. 12. Southern deviled eggs. Number 12 is the absolute queen of the covered dish supper, Southern deviled eggs. A 70s hostess wouldn't dream of showing up to a gathering without a specialized Tupperware egg tray filled with these. This vintage recipe keeps things strictly traditional. You mash the hard-boiled yolks with Duke's mayonnaise, a spoonful of sweet pickle relish, a dash of yellow mustard, and just a tiny splash of the pickle juice to smooth it out. The final mandatory step is a heavy dusting of red paprika shaken from that classic little metal McCormick tin. Outside of Southern church homecomings and Easter Sunday dinners, people rarely take the time to boil, peel, and pipe these by hand anymore. 13. Boiled peanuts. These are the unofficial snack of a Southern road trip, classic boiled peanuts. In the 1970s, you couldn't drive down a secondary highway without seeing a hand-painted plywood sign pointing toward a smoking iron washpot by the roadside. This Piggly Wiggly recipe uses raw, green peanuts in the shell, simmered for hours in a heavy brine of rock salt and water. Apart from roadside stands scattered across the coastal plains of the Deep South, you rarely find anyone boiling these from scratch at home today. They lose all their crunch and turn completely soft, absorbing that salty water right into the meat. Cracking open a warm, wet shell with your thumbs and popping that soft, salty peanut into your mouth takes me straight back to riding in the passenger seat of my daddy's truck with the windows rolled down. 14. Pigs in a blanket. Next, we have the king of the children's birthday party table, pigs in a blanket. Back in the 70s, this recipe was the height of convenience cooking, using a can of refrigerated Pillsbury Crescent rolls and a package of Oscar Mayer Little Smokies or standard hot dogs cut into thirds. You pop open that cardboard tube with a loud smack against the counter edge, cut the dough into narrow triangles, and roll up each little sausage like a tiny sleeping bag. Aside from casual game day finger foods or children's platters, you rarely see these baked up fresh at home anymore. They bake until the crescent dough turns buttery, flaky, and golden brown. They leave a faint shine of grease on your napkins, and eating one warm from the oven takes me straight back to roller skating parties and neighborhood block gatherings. Bologna cups. Item 15 is a budget-friendly lunchbox favorite that my generation remembers fondly. Fried bologna cups. In the 1970s, a thick-cut log of Cons, or Bryan bologna, was a staple in every family refrigerator. For this side dish, you take a thick, round slice of bologna, leave the red plastic ring casing on just until cooking, and drop it straight onto a hot, dry skillet. As the meat heats through, the edges curl up tightly, forming a perfect little meat bowl or cup. You then flip it over and drop a big spoonful of hot, leftover mashed potatoes or warm Kraft macaroni and cheese right into the center. Outside of deep rural pockets of the Appalachian Hills or working-class country kitchens, this dish has completely vanished from modern tables. It is salty, crispy along the edges, and reminds me of quick summer lunches eaten while sitting bare-legged on the kitchen linoleum. Number 16 is a slow-simmered Southern tradition. Collard greens with ham hock. In the 70s, you didn't buy your greens pre-washed in a plastic bag. You bought huge, sandy bundles from the Piggly Wiggly produce bins. You spent an hour at the kitchen sink washing each leaf by hand to get the grit out, tearing the tough ribs away from the green. This recipe simmers those leaves for 3 hours in a heavy pot filled with water, a splash of apple cider vinegar, a pinch of sugar, and a smoky, salt-cured ham hock. Today, the long cooking time means people mostly buy canned greens, and scratch-made pot liquor is a lost art outside of traditional Sunday dinners. The greens turn incredibly tender and dark. Pouring that smoky, savory green broth over a piece of cornbread tastes exactly like sitting at my grandmother's table. 7-layer pea salad. Item 17 is a colorful masterpiece that always sat inside a clear glass bowl, the 7-layer pea salad. This was the ultimate show-off side dish for a 1970s neighborhood potluck. You start with a base of crisp iceberg lettuce, then layer on frozen green peas, diced celery, green bell pepper, red onion rings, and a solid sheet of mayonnaise smoothed over the top to seal in the freshness. The whole thing gets topped with shredded cheddar and crumbled Oscar Mayer bacon bits. You almost never see this layered salad made from scratch today. It sits in the refrigerator overnight so the flavors can marry, and a single spoonful brings back memories of covered dish suppers where the dessert table stretched across the entire room. Number 18 is a thick, comforting soup that warmed up many a rainy Tuesday, classic corn chowder. This recipe relies heavily on the pantry staples of the era, combining a can of sweet cream-style corn with diced russet potatoes, heavy cream, and a base of salt pork or smoky bacon grease rendered down in a Dutch oven. You simmer it slowly until the starch from the potatoes naturally thickens the sweet broth. Today, most modern families skip the stovetop prep and just open a can of ready-to-serve soup, leaving this homemade chowder restricted to small coastal towns and deep country kitchens. Crumbling a handful of Nabisco premium saltine crackers over the top takes me right back to coming home from school with wet shoes and finding a hot bowl waiting on the table. Item 19 is a sweet, crunchy classic that always felt a little bit fancy: the Waldorf salad. This recipe originally came from a Grand New York hotel, but by the 1970s, Piggly Wiggly had helped turn it into a Southern holiday tradition. The booklet instructs you to toss crisp, red delicious apples, chopped celery, and whole Thompson seedless grapes in a light coating of heavy mayonnaise. The final essential step is folding in a big handful of chopped Southern walnuts. Outside of traditional Thanksgiving tables or old-school tea rooms in historic Southern towns, you rarely see this fruit salad served anymore. It is cool, sweet, and has a sharp, clean crunch. One bite of this from a crystal dish instantly takes me back to sitting at the grown-up table for the very first time. Macaroni and tomatoes. Number 20 is a simple, budget-friendly dish born out of pure Southern pantry resourcefulness: macaroni and tomatoes. This was the ultimate quick weekday side when grocery money was running low before Friday payday. You boil up a box of standard elbow macaroni, drain it, and dump it straight back into the pot with a large can of Del Monte whole peeled tomatoes, crushing them with your wooden spoon. This vintage recipe seasons the pot with nothing more than a spoonful of bacon grease, a pinch of sugar to cut the acidity, and plenty of coarse black pepper. This humble dish has mostly vanished from modern menus. It is warm, deeply savory, and tastes like a rainy afternoon in Mama's kitchen. 21 is the undisputed king of the 70s living room coffee table: cocktail wieners in barbecue sauce. Long before fancy charcuterie boards took over, a proper party host simply set out a bubbling West Bend crock pot filled with these. The recipe is famously simple, combining a package of Little Smokies with a bottle of smoky Kraft barbecue sauce and a jar of sweet Heinz grape jelly. You let it simmer on low until the sauce reduces into a sticky, sweet, and tangy glaze that coats the meat completely. Aside from casual game day tailgates, people rarely serve this vintage party food out of a slow cooker anymore. They are sweet, smoky, and eating them with a colored plastic toothpick takes me straight back to backyard parties where the adults listen to those old transistor radios. Cheese straws. Number 22 is a savory Southern baking tradition that separates the casual cooks from the true Southern bakers: homemade cheese straws. In the 1970s, every proper Southern kitchen had a metal cookie press hidden in the back of the cabinet specifically for this recipe. You knead together a sharp mixture of extra sharp cheddar cheese, softened butter, flour, and a heavy pinch of cayenne pepper for a slow, warm heat. Then you press the stiff dough through a star-shaped template, cutting them into long, jagged ribbons before baking. Apart from historic low-country coastal towns or bridal showers in deep Mississippi, you almost never see these pressed out by hand anymore. Stuffed grape leaves. Next up is an unexpected vintage treasure from the international section of the old Piggly Wiggly booklet, stuffed grape leaves. During the 70s expansion, corporate kitchens started introducing Mediterranean flavors to suburban Southern home cooks. This recipe adapts the classic Greek dolma for a Southern pantry, stuffing jarred grape leaves with long-grain white rice, ground beef, lemon juice, and a handful of dried mint. Aside from historic Greek immigrant communities scattered near Tarpon Springs or the Gulf Coast, this scratch-made side completely disappeared from regular grocery booklets. They are tender, wonderfully earthy, and have a bright, citrusy punch. Squeezing fresh lemon over a warm platter of these reminds me of the decade when Southern cooks first started experimenting with new flavors from around the world. Scalloped corn. Item 24 is a rich, comforting bake that always filled the house with the sweetest aroma: old-fashioned scalloped corn. This dish transforms standard canned vegetables into a decadent side by mixing a can of whole kernel corn with heavy cream, melted butter, beaten eggs, and a sleeve of finely crushed Nabisco saltine crackers. You layer the cracker crumbs and the corn mixture inside a Pyrex dish, finishing it with a final layer of buttered crumbs that turn deep golden brown in the oven. Today, busy families usually opt for quick microwave bags of frozen corn, leaving this traditional baked dish restricted to rural church suppers and old-school cafeterias. It is incredibly creamy, sweet, and has a buttery toasted cracker crunch that feels like a warm hug. Old-fashioned baked macaroni and cheese. Last but not least is a side dish that needs no introduction. But the way we make it today has lost its vintage soul: classic Southern baked macaroni and cheese. This 1970s recipe comes straight from the back of the Muller's Elbow macaroni box. It skips the fancy, expensive stovetop cheese sauces. Instead, you layer boiled macaroni with blocks of sharp cheddar shredded right on a box grater, pouring a mixture of whole milk, a couple of beaten eggs, and melted butter straight over the top. But here is the real 70s signature: a heavy blanket of crushed Ritz crackers tossed in butter baked over the top until it forms a crisp, golden crust. Today, folks rely on neon yellow powder packs or microwave cups. But one forkful of this, with that rich, gooey cheese pull and the buttery crunch of the crackers, and you'll remember exactly why this was the most anticipated dish on the holiday table. And there you have it. 25 forgotten Southern sides straight from the pages of those old grocery store recipe cards. Cooking these recipes today wasn't just about filling the kitchen with those familiar, wonderful smells. It was about slowing down and honoring the scratch-made traditions that used to bring our families together every single Sunday. So many of these dishes have vanished from our modern tables, but they don't have to stay forgotten. I'd love to know in the comments, which of these did your mama or grandmother make for you growing up? Let's keep these memories alive together. Thank you for stepping back in time with me today, and I'll see you in the next video.